No, because Adam is saying, well, the goal of socialism requires
here?
violence, which I say every ideology requires like an enforcement mechanism, right?
There's no shit. Wait, hold on. There's a difference.
No, but it's not the same type of violence, right? Like, police enforcement does not equate French Revolution, right? Like this is not within the same realm of violence. It's not even close. The violence, the enforcement that Stalin has imposed upon the Ukrainians during the Holodomor is not even close to the police violence, right? In any capitalistic country. It's not even close. Not even close to the same, right?
I've been saying the question is not the violence in terms of the government has not been enforced.
I'm not talking about enforcement. Yes.
Its laws and things like that. It's like, no. We'd have to have a violent revolution to change the system to match that as well.
Well, no, even the technical aspects of implementing a white ethno state would require violence. I think we can all agree on that.
If we're switching around the white ethno state and the socialist thing, on the white ethno state, like, yeah, you certainly, I do think, require some level of violence, at least on the enforcement mechanism to enforce like a white ethno state
because there are Americans that are not going to want to leave, no matter how many incentives you give them. Sooner or later, you're going to have to forcibly remove them, right? It's the same thing with the socialist stuff.
First of all, my model is based entirely on voluntary transactions. Nobody's forced to sell to the government if they don't want to. Now,
yes, I understand that. And there are people who want a white ethno state that say the exact same thing. They say, my model is completely nonviolent. We're going to offer incentives for people to leave, but they're still advocating for a system that I believe is still going to sooner or later end up in violence. So I think a big problem that we have with the system you're advocating for is that we personally believe that sooner or later it's going to inevitably end up in violence.
Yeah, I think the difference is that there's a history of when white supremacists get in power, they don't exactly, you see even white supremacists, if I can just finish the point.
So, get in power, it devolves into violence.
But there's also a history. Well, here's what I will say. I don't think there's a robust history, even in part, of a bunch of white supremacists getting in power and doing the nonviolent ethnic cleansings. I don't think you could really point to examples of that, but I could point to a history of socialists taking power and doing the nonviolent social ownership policies, right? And so, again, I'm part of the... Well, the Nordic states, the European and sort of oceanic labor and social democratic movements historically, obviously there's, there are examples of socialization in this country, government service expansion, and state-owned ownerships that didn't require violence, right? I mean, what?
You made a claim that was kind of a whopper. You said 2/3 of Norway's wealth is already socialized.
Which is true. You can look it up.
How do you, are you saying 2/3 of Norway's wealth is owned by a sovereign wealth fund?
2/3 of it is owned in the various collective pools of assets. So you've got the sovereign wealth funds.
You mean oil? You mean oil, but okay.
So they've got multiple sovereign wealth funds, you've got state-owned enterprises, and you've got government services.
And that's all the wealth of Norway, even the wealth held by the Norwegian citizens?
It's oil.
Yep. So if you compare private wealth,
it's oil.
Held by the citizenry, and then the public wealth, all the wealth of Norway, 2/3 of it is
it's oil. Owned
socially. And wouldn't you know it, there wasn't a fucking civil war in Norway.
Because it's oil.
That doesn't seem remotely possible to me.
Okay.
Because it's oil.
I mean, hey, like, it just doesn't seem possible. For me personally, I don't know. It just doesn't seem like a convincing argument to me. I think that when I looked into this,
it's oil.
I don't recall the Wikipedia page of Norway having a fucking civil war or devolving into anarchy because they established their...
Because it's oil.
Norway's not socialist. You're making
Didn't say they were.
Norway is socialist.
It's oil.
You just
didn't say that.
What are you talking about?
Didn't say that.
You used Norway as an example of some country that implemented socialism peacefully.
No, I didn't. I used them as an example of a country that instituted my institutions. So, for instance, if you were to say,
Econoboi,
is it not socialist now?
Well, it's socialist to collectively own the means of production, right? Now, I've endorsed two things. I've endorsed socialism as an ideal and also a process by which we get there. Now, you guys are looking at the ideal and saying, well, that necessarily requires violence. And what I've said is, well, hey, look, we've got all these examples of all these different countries at different stages of development, different cultures, different types of governments, different people in general, different ages of technology, where they've engaged in a process by which they took privately owned means of production and put it into public ownership. And they've done that non-violently. They've done it with voluntary transactions, with expanding investment in certain key state industries, state industrial policy. That's a non-violent process, right? Now, obviously, some societies which have done socialism, like you guys are describing, like China and Russia, they did have violent revolutions. And I don't endorse those experiments. I endorse the non-violent ones, the incrementalist ones. But to say that basically, well, hey, look, all of these other societies that have been able to collectivize things non-violently, basically, what, Adam, you're saying I just don't buy it? Like, they exist. They did it without violence. And I feel like we could do the same thing here.
They're not socialist.
I didn't. Oh my God,
You
Sitch.
did. Wait, you keep no,
Oh
no, no.
my
you keep playing a
God.
shell game with this. No, you
I'm not
can act
playing a shell
exasperated.
game,
You're
Sitch.
playing a shell
I'm being
game.
very
Okay.
clear.
Wait,
I'm
no,
saying
you're not being
no.
clear.
I'm being
You're
clear.
not being
I am
clear.
being clear.
You're
Sitch.
not being clear.
I'm being
you
clear.
Said
I
you
disagree.
said I'm a socialist, and here's my system that's a socialist system. And then we got in
Didn't
this
say
conversation
that.
about whether Then we got in this conversation about whether that could be advocated through violence, and Adam said he didn't think so. And you said, well, Norway did it. And then you said, well, Norway's not socialist. They don't
Norway-
consider themselves socialist. And you
Sitch.
said, I never said they were. And
I didn't
then
say they
said,
were.
well, wait a minute. You said that they're advocating the system that you want, which you said is socialism.
I said they're engaging in an institutional framework that I recommend. Okay, Sitch, let me ask you a question.
So they're
Do you think,
so
if
they're
I can
doing
just ask you a
something that's
question,
not
Sitch,
socialism.
do you think, no, Sitch, you already agreed
Are
at the
they
very
doing
beginning.
something that's socialism or not?
Sitch, let me ask you a question, okay? Do you agree that if a society becomes socialist, that they have to engage in a process to become socialist? That at one point they're capitalist and then they become socialist? Do you agree with that?
Sure.
Okay, so what I'm saying is
You're on the road
society.
to socialism. That's your argument.
So what I'm saying is that society is a mixture, obviously, of capitalist institutions and socialist institutions. Because obviously we have a lot of, in this society we have things like the TVA, which is a socially owned institution that produces electricity for people and does infrastructure development. But then we have a bunch of privately owned electricity companies that do the same exact thing. So it's a mixed market, right? I am endorsing a process by which we incrementally take those privately owned institutions and make them publicly owned institutions.
Yeah, I get all that. That's
Norway.
fine. That's nothing to do
Okay,
with
so
what we're
if
talking
you agree, then you would have to. Adam, you're laughing because you're a dumb fuck that doesn't seem to be following the conversation. Okay, let me talk to the adult in the fucking room, Sitch. Okay,
I am following the conversation.
No, you're
perfectly.
clearly not.
following
Okay,
what's happening here,
no,
but
you're
okay,
not.
sure.
You guys are fucking insufferable with this point. I don't understand how you can agree. Okay, we have institutions that go from private to public. We agree that there's a process by which we socialize things. Now, Norway has socialized a lot of shit in their society. They're not 100% socially owned, but we can at least see, hey, insofar as we can get to 50% social ownership or whatever the fuck, right? That is not a nonviolent process. And I don't have strong reason to believe that going from 40 to 50 to 60 to 70 necessarily needs to be a violent process. And I've already said at the beginning of this conversation that to the extent that you get to, let's say 70%, and all of a sudden you find that, hey, 30% of people are basically saying, take it from my cold fucking dead hands, you evil government pig, I'm never going to sell to you. I would just say, okay, fuck it, just let them keep it. I'm not really that offended by 30% of the wealth being privately owned, and I'm not willing to fucking throw people in gulags because what, we want to socialize an extra 20, 30% of wealth? I've already said that, okay? But you guys seem to be completely misunderstanding everything that I'm saying in a bad faith way. Sitch, does everything that I just said make coherent sense to you?
What you said just now, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, I understand the point you're making.
So,
Dude, I don't know why it's so hard to find this information, but gotta dig for it a little bit. But so this is percentage of Norwegian wealth owned by the state. Pretty good, right? Obviously, excluding homes, all wealth excluding homes. Okay, there you go. All right, now let's go to why this is a niche example. All right. The Norwegian state owns 67% of the shares in Econor and receives dividends in the same way as other shareholders. In 2025, expected dividend paid to the state is around NOK 37.8 billion. The carbon tax and the NO tax are important environmental taxes. The petroleum industry is also included in the emissions trading system. Companies that are licensees on the Norwegian shelf must therefore purchase emission allowances if their greenhouse gas emissions exceed. Okay. Would introduce a carbon tax. All right. Yeah, okay. 67% of the shares. Okay, yeah. Yeah. This isn't exactly, I mean, you're not talking about other industries, right? You're not talking about tech. You're not really talking about tech. You're not talking about yeah, okay.
So in the future, in the future, when you guys have a discussion about my views, and for the rest of the time that you're speaking to me, I don't want to hear he called Norway socialist. I don't want to hear he advocated for.
Bro, oil is only 4%. No, you're not getting the point. Is that maybe Norway can show off the fact that they are able to buy its oil industry but that does not necessarily mean that they are able to buy other industries. Does that make sense? You're extrapolating it to other things. Yeah, exactly. Natural resources. You're saying, okay, a state-owned government can actually own natural resources and actually slowly buy up the shares over time, but that doesn't necessarily apply to stuff like smartphone companies or internet companies or anything else. Like, do you realize how delusional that is? Yeah.
Violence. I don't want to hear he believes that no matter what, you should socialize the means of production. I don't want to hear, oh, he's sweeping for tanky experiments, because I've never done any of those things. And you guys repeated that shit like,
okay, I don't know why you're still linking oil. It's just so stupid.
like 100 times during this conversation. But you've just agreed that what I said is coherent. So I hope we fucking can finally move on from all the misunderstandings.
It's completely incoherent because you
okay, well, at least Sitch agrees.
There are plenty examples of socialist countries that achieve socialism non-violently. And then you use Norway as an example.
They've achieved socialist institutions. They haven't literally 100%ed social ownership, but I've said that a dozen times, Adam. I'll say it again. They've engaged in a process by which they've taken a lot of privately owned assets and make them publicly owned. I think that process has been overwhelmingly in many of these societies nonviolent processes. Those are the processes by which I would endorse. Insofar as we get to 60, 70, 80% social ownership, and then basically we have to wage a fucking revolution to get to the other 20%, I would say, I'd rather not have a revolution in this country just to have some weird ideal of social ownership. So again, Adam, I'm going to ask you, did you understand everything that I just said, or was it completely incoherent to you?
Americans calling the Scandinavian countries socialist is so insufferable. I mean, like, if you want to own the fact that like these Scandinavian countries barely have any fucking startup companies, then sure, I guess you should go for it. Here, why don't people start up more companies in Europe?
I understand what you're saying. It's very
okay.
simple.
Europe's startup ecosystem faces several hurdles that make it less attractive for entrepreneurs compared to the United States. These include a fragmented market, regulatory complexities, a lack of readily available funding, and cultural factors that influence risk appetite and entrepreneurial drive. Ooh, uh-oh.
Thank you. I'm glad we've finally gotten there.
You just accused us of saying a bunch of things about you if we didn't say in this conversation.
You guys have said about 100 times that I said Norway did socialism and is a socialist country, which I didn't say. I'm just saying that they engaged in a process by which they created.
And then you.
Okay, well now it's an implication. Now it's just an implication. It wasn't an implication of what I said at all.
Experiments and all sorts of other things.
Well, I think thanks for reeling it back and saying, oh, actually, hey, Econoboi, you didn't say that. It was just the implication that I made up from what you said. Thank you for admitting that. If you think it was just an implication of what I said, you could have asked me to clarify.
It's weird that you say that we're bad faith, and then you keep doing this thing where you try to reframe everything I say in a
you said the word. Oh, it's actually just an implication of what you said, but you said I actually said the things, which I didn't do.
3 times. Adam said, "Where's an example of this where you can have socialism without violence?" And you pointed to Norway.
Why did I do that?
You understand that the average person, a reasonable person, would be like, "So you're saying Norway's a socialist country?" And then when you go on for 10 minutes to say, "No, I didn't mean they're a socialist country. I just meant they had this very specific institution." That's fine. You can make the fucking point, Econoboi, but you don't get to fucking berate us for when you say the most obvious fucking thing on the planet incorrectly.
I don't think it was that obvious.
It was the most obvious fucking planet.
Okay.
Like,
well, now, hey,
at
least now, yeah, I'm really triggered. At least now we finally have agreed. Econoboi's not saying Norway's a socialist country. Econoboi's just saying Norway's engaged in a process that he would endorse.
No, I mean, like, isn't it No True Scotsman or something, where you're pointing at all the good things in the country or something, and you're like, oh yeah, see, these are all socialists, and you point at all the bad things, and you're like, see, these are not socialists, these are all because it's capitalism.
Socialist process to get your sovereign wealth fund.
Yeah, there you go. You've finally
Oh, sorry. Okay, yeah. I mean, like, he didn't really say like, oh, all the bad things are capitalist, but he's basically saying, oh, all the good things ever in throughout history are good are essentially socialist. Okay, dude.
Fully internalized my position. Okay, so back to the original point. I think that Norway's done this without a lot of violence. Many other societies have done it without a lot of violence. I don't see a reason to think that
all these positive examples of socialism or socialist institutions that you're pointing to are all socialist institutions that exist within liberal countries in liberal frameworks. None of these countries are actually socialist countries.
If
you wanted to say you're in favor of having a strong welfare system or welfare state or having social institutions in liberal countries, that's a very different position than saying that you're in favor of socialism.
Sitch, we've already agreed. You've agreed on every one of my premises. You've already agreed that societies go from capitalist societies to socialist societies. Okay, then I don't know how you would not agree with this then, flatly. In order for a society to become socialist, if I could just finish, in order for a society to become socialist, it has to go from a previous system to the current existing socialist system, right? So similar to how we became a liberal society, but we used to not be a liberal society, we engaged in a process by which incrementally we became more liberal over time, right? So I wouldn't go to, for instance,
was America not a liberal country?
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
We're a British colony? Is that what you mean?
Okay, presumably you wouldn't say we've established the liberal ideal when women couldn't vote and when black people were slaves. I don't think we were a liberal society.
We were living up to liberal standards, but it was a country founded in the process of liberalism.
Right, so we weren't, well, I don't know, historical disagreements, whatever. The point is, clearly we hadn't achieved this, not the socialists, clearly we hadn't achieved the liberal ideal when black people were enslaved and when women didn't have the right to vote. Okay,
of course.
Now, I would say that, hey, look, when women got the right to vote, I would say we still didn't achieve the liberal ideal because we had Jim Crow and poll taxes and all that stuff. But I think that by giving women the right to vote, we went one step closer to achieving the liberal ideal. And so similarly, if in this country, for instance, we did something like...
Hold on. Let me stop you for a second, because I think it's a very important point. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
The way in which people advocated for civil rights for black people and for women and for gay people and for...
Wait, hold on. I'm sure Econoboi is not actually saying this, but does he actually unironically think that does he think that socialist countries are sorry, does he think like the women's rights movement and like the black civil rights movement stuff are socialist? Like would he define that as socialist?
Everyone, it's been primarily in the framework of liberalism and liberal individual rights, and the reason for that is because this country was founded on those principles, even if we all agree that the country didn't live up to those principles. So the fact that that was the framework, that was the culture that people had to advocate for those rights for in the first place shows, yes, everyone...
Those wouldn't happen in socialist. Yeah, exactly. Oh, you'll see, Vlad. You see, Vlad, okay? When the people do not vote, you cannot have voting right, see? You see, by enticing the masses with the delusion of voting, you do not get to entice them with the right to vote either. Ooh.
Was thinking along America on the lines of being a liberal country. And this is the point I'm trying to make. No, I don't think it really helps your argument when you point to Norway or these other countries that are liberal countries that have some kind of social or socialist-esque type institution. Those are still liberal countries that have...
Right. He is saying that our liberal democracy wasn't fully enacted until everyone had those rights. So technically our democracy didn't start until the 1970s.
Liberal cultures and
liberalism is not in contradiction to socialism,
you're saying,
to be clear.
You're saying that there is some kind of process that you think where we're going to go from being a liberal country to a socialist country. And if that process does occur, then those ideas, those arguments, that framework is going to change. And one of those things that's going to go away is the concept of individual rights, which is a framework of liberalism and is not the framework of socialism.
I don't know why it would be the case that in a world where all the capital is socially owned, you don't have individual rights. You don't have the right to free speech. You don't have the right to vote. You don't have the right to marry who you want. You don't have the right to express yourself.
Socialism fundamentally doesn't believe in individual rights. Marx did not believe in individual rights.
Because they thought that these things were just defined via they were defined by the bourgeoisie in order to like tell the masses that everyone is born with innate characteristics. Basically, it's the view that everything is a class struggle. The reason why people are racist is because it's a class struggle, right? What I'm talking about specifically is class reductionism. That's specifically what I'm talking about, is class reductionism. All right, it's the perspective where racism doesn't actually exist. It's just a version of class struggles, right? People don't actually hate black people. It's because, well, that's just a product of capitalism, right? So technically, you cannot have rights. You can't have rights because there's nothing to be had in the first place because it's based off of a faulty idea, right? Based off of a capitalistic idea. So how could you have rights? How could you take back rights from something that you never had in the first place?
Marx did. First of all, that's not true. Okay,
He
Marx
said rights
was
atomize the individual and were used to separate people from the community.
Marx was a fervent defender of certain individual rights like free speech.
Certainly.
Okay, it's just a matter of which rights do you think people should have or shouldn't have. Like, I don't believe in the individual right to molest children. I would hope you guys don't either, for God's sakes.
Come on.
Okay.
Come on,
Well, no shit.
please.
Obviously, it would be a debate about
come
what rights
on.
you extend to people. Okay.
Come on.
Some people have radical views on gun ownership as an individual,
Socialists
right?
do not believe conceptually in individual rights from a philosophical position. It's not rooted in the philosophy of socialism.
That's
There's
not
no
true.
basis
When
for
you
it.
you can read there's a book called The Political Theory of Liberal Socialism where
Except for black women, apparently. Okay.
this guy Matt
liberal.
McManus.
Okay, so now
who-
we have liberal socialism. Okay.
well,
Except for black
Sitch,
women.
okay.
do you want me to explain the history of actually existing socialists that believed in
No, if you
liberal
wanna
principles,
find
or
that
do you
there's
want to
like the
continue
one
to just
carve-out,
deny
the
that they
one
didn't
framework?
exist?
No, wait. If I say that there's no framework for individual rights in socialism, and you're like, well, okay, maybe for like 95%, but there's one sect called liberal socialism, and they do carve that out. Okay, there you go. You got me. You got the 5% that's got on the free
So
rights right there.
once
the free
again,
speech.
it's not 5%. For instance, when you look at the history of many of the democratically elected socialist governments and a lot of the early labor and social democratic movements, they respected things like individual rights and your right to the ballot and your right to express yourself. They didn't move to prevent people from doing those things. Liberal frameworks, insofar as we're talking about like politically liberal frameworks, like, you know, individual rights and your right to interact with democratic institutions, is clearly not in contradiction to many of the existing histories of socialist movements in these Western countries, in these oceanic countries, right? And if you want to deny that history, then okay, whatever.
Do you
I
agree
mean,
that the core principle of liberalism is that there's a prioritization of individual freedom and individual rights, and believing that individuals should be able to pursue their own interests with minimal interference?
yeah, of course, but there's clearly a wide disagreement as to what it means to provide people access to those rights. And for instance, what a lot of socialists will say is that when it comes to your actual ability to obtain, like your ability to actually interact with those rights, that things like social ownership actually increase your ability to interact with a liberal democratic framework because of things like, oh, you know, whatever they'll say oppression in the workplace, they'll say wealth inequality as a means to interact with political institutions. Like a lot of socialists ground their socialism in a defense of the ability to act freely and act individually.
What year are we in, guys? We have socialist debates back. Oh God.
Of course that's true.
Briefly, if we say liberalism is a philosophy that's based around maximizing individual rights and freedoms, what is socialism?
So at the very beginning of this conversation, I said the broadest tent of socialism is the collective ownership of the means of production. That socialism in its most foundational sense is concerned with how production is organized.
Okay, so that is the issue that I'm getting at. The core of liberalism is the focus on individual rights and freedom. The core of socialism is something else. It's something very different.
But they're compatible.
This is why I can't define myself as a social democrat anymore. Just mainly because, like, I feel like the more I define myself as a social democrat, the more like people, like leeches, actual fucking social leeches, will like latch on and, you know, fucking take advantage of that shit. I'm just gonna. I think from now on, whatever I label myself as, like, it has to have the word liberal in it. I think that has to be a requirement. I think it has to have the word liberal in it, right? It doesn't matter what it is. Like, I don't know, like, fuck, social liberal, neoliberal, it doesn't matter.
That's what I'm saying.
They can be. Well, hold on.
They can be. We agree then, Sitch. We fucking fully agree.
We don't agree.
You just said they can be. That's what we agree on the point.
Okay, yeah, you can say they can be. That's fine. That's great. The difference is that that's not the core principle, which means a lot of people are going to be willing to sacrifice those individual freedoms to reach that core principle. And that's the history of socialism when it takes over countries.
Sitch, first of all, I've never. Again, you keep sneaking this in.
I'm glad that you're not in favor of that. That's fine.
I have never ever endorsed.
Foodshops, check Discord, bro. What is this? Norway wealth fund record profit from big tech bets. Largest government fund in the world. Wait, what is this supposed to show? What? The U.S. technology sector made up almost 15% of the fund's investments when a global sell-off led to one of the worst years in the global financial crisis. Last year, it held, oh, yeah, this was during COVID, right? Last year, it held a 1.2% per stake in Apple, 1.4%. So well, the fund was created in... Dude, why are you doing this on your phone? Open link. In recommending 2 weeks that oil stocks be excluded from its equity benchmark index, Norges Bank, the Norwegian, has moved oil stocks to a speculative grade risk. If Norway's finance ministry and parliament agree, GPFG will still invest in oil and gas stocks, but under different terms and at a reduced level. What? This doesn't show anything. I'm sorry. I don't know what you're trying to show off here. Waste of time. Whatever.
Socialist world,
I have
unfortunately.
I've never ever endorsed autocratic socialist experiments. However, what I
know
have
that.
also
Yes,
done
it's very good.
is I've pointed out the actually existing history of democratic socialist governments that have done substantially the opposite of what you're
Existing
describing.
in liberal
right?
countries, yes.
Sitch, you can be a liberal country and also have the social ownership. You
Bro, you intentionally ignored it. Yeah, it still doesn't know anything. What? How? It doesn't show anything. So it holds a 1.2% stake in Apple, 1.4% holding in Microsoft, and 1.3% in Alphabet. Really? How is that state ownership of tech industries? What?
already agreed.
15% in tech stakes versus 4% in oil and gas. Are you sure you didn't? You read right? 4% GP have a whole 4% of its fund. Will invest into 7%. Last year I held a 1.2%. And 7% in 2022. EFG will still invest in oil prices, but under oil stocks and additional amounts in corporate. No, you fucking moron. You absolute fucking buffoon. You retard. What I'm talking specifically about is that the state owns most of a company, or to a degree in which it is able to claim state ownership over a country. Over a company, okay? It doesn't matter how much the fund allocates in order to say, yeah, I invested this much of the fund into its stocks or whatever. All you're telling me is that it invested less into oil with that fund and more into tech, but at the same time, it's still 66% of that company, right? What's it called? ENOC or something like that? That is owned by the country, which you can say that it's now state-owned because most of its stocks is owned by the country, right? But that doesn't imply, nor what have you shown me implies that Norway owns tech companies, right? It doesn't own that. So you haven't shown me shit. Stupid.
Yes, I agree. These things can coexist. You can be a
liberal
liberal
country
country that has social ownership of the means of production.
You're not advocating for that. You're advocating for things to become socialist.
Okay, stop. I'm sorry. You're statistically illiterate. Okay, I'm sorry. It's just, listen, you don't know how to read. It's fine.
As you said it's a gradual process.
I'm advocating for, Sitch, you said earlier in this conversation, you can have social ownership and liberalism, okay?
Yes.
I'm advocating for, under our liberal framework, to engage in democratic institutions and to socialize different means of production to where, yes, maybe one day we can have, in an ideal sense, the social ownership of the means of production. But that doesn't mean that we abolish the right to vote, limit people's freedom of speech, limit people's freedom of press, limit people's ability to politically organize, that we get rid of this idea of equality under the law, that there's no necessary tying of these two things. And that's why I reference the historical socialist movements that took power in democratic frameworks and didn't do the things that you're describing. Like, I don't think it's quite as